All right. As a global electronic payment service provider, Visa is a company that connects. However, if you look at the industry with intensifying competition, changing consumer trends as well as political pressures, the company is forced to adapt to these changes. As such, we are pleased to bring to you today our strategy of Visa's connection, a strategy which will allow Visa to reach out more effectively and efficiently to its consumers through the head, heart, and hand. Good afternoon, good morning, judges. I'm Stanley from the National University of Singapore, and these are my teammates, Kenneth, Chimi, and Icho. Now, before we can draw upon the key objectives of our recommendations, let us take a step backwards to actually understand where we are today as a company. Today, Visa is the world's biggest EPS, electronic payment service provider, in terms of transaction value. And ultimately, where we'd like to be as a company is to actually consolidate and maintain our market leadership in what we do, and secondly, leverage upon growing market opportunities, especially in China. As such, it brings us now to three main issues that we would like to address today. Firstly, how do we mitigate the current and short-term risk we face from the antitrust lawsuit? Secondly, how do we build upon our market presence in China, a growing market? And lastly, how do we respond to competition in our current and key markets? So, to do this, we'll try to understand our company, or Visa as a whole. We've broken it down into the revenue streams as well as our cost structure. If we look at our revenue streams, Visa draws upon key revenues, core revenues, from three main portions. Firstly, service revenues, up to 38.5%, data processing, and lastly, international transactions. If we analyze the cost structure of the company, we see this company which has high fixed costs as well as low variable costs, which brings about a cost structure of a high degree of operating leverage. Hence, this brings upon our business model in which there's emphasis on network effect or volume-driven business model. And secondly, Visa has diversified yet complementary revenue streams, which allows it to create greater customer lifetime value. Now we look at the key threats and key opportunities that the company faces. Firstly, we see the short-term threat lies in the terms of the lawsuit from over 5 million US merchants on antitrust issues. And the variability of the effects of this lawsuit actually ranges from few $billion to up to few $100 billion in US dollars. Secondly, we are faced with the threat of a new memorandum of understanding signed between our global rival, MasterCard, as well as the local company, CUP. Thirdly, we see that CUP is expanding on a global scale, one that threatens to encroach on our presence in our current key markets. And lastly, we see the strong political opposition, especially within China, towards accepting and conducting themselves according to standards set upon by the WTO. Now on the other side of the scale, we analyze the key opportunities that the company faces. Firstly, we see that China is poised to become the US #1 inbound travel market. Secondly, the debit and credit cards industry is expected to grow 20% annually in China. And lastly, Asia Pacific, North America, as well as Western Europe are to remain key market for credit cards and debit cards. Now this brings us to our key implications which affects the company. Firstly, there are complications that we've observed in China, things which lie on political level, which may be too challenging for us to solve as a company. But however, it's crucial for us to actually create a growth platform since it's such a big and growing market. Secondly, Visa has to create a competitive response to threats that it faces in its current market, with CUP entering it, and to protect this market. And thirdly, it has to actually find ways to actually mitigate the risk faced by the uncertainty of the penalty of the lawsuits. Now, let us look at our competitor. If we actually compare Visa with CUP, we see four distinct differences. Firstly, is that Visa faces uncertain and strict regulations in operations in China, whereas CUP, as a centrally run government organization, we see there's only bank allowed to process interbank point-of-sale transactions in renminbi, or the Chinese currency. Secondly, we see that, forgive me for the, Visa actually has 1 to 2% commission charge on the total transaction value in terms of renminbi transactions conducted in China. Whereas in CUP, there are no transaction value for international transactions, which makes it more appealing for Chinese tourists to actually utilize the CUP networks when spending overseas. Thirdly, we see that renminbi conversion is actually involved in two currency conversions, which actually make it more expensive too for Chinese tourists to consume using Visa networks overseas. Whereas as compared to CUP, they actually use the same day exchange rate for renminbi. Lastly, we see the key advantages and core strengths of Visa actually lies in that of its security and technology, whereas for CUP, it lies in cost competitiveness. Hence, this brings upon two key implications that will affect the company moving forward. Firstly, is that political pressures make it challenging for Visa to reach out to the Chinese market, and hence, in such a market, relationships is central for its growth strategy. And secondly, core competencies of Visa lie beyond just that on competing on cost, but that in actually emphasizing on its key competitive advantages of security and technology. And this actually remains a crucial value element that consumers are willing to pay for. Therefore, what we have done in the past 5 minutes or so is really to look at the key issues, draw upon the key implications, which therefore bring us down to 3 main key objectives for our recommendations today. Firstly, foster a collaborative approach to reduce the risk of the lawsuit. Secondly, resolute value through emphasis on communicating our competitive strengths. And lastly, improving cost competitiveness to enhance our perceived value in the eyes of consumers and retailers alike. As such, we bring to you our HQ strategy of heart, hand, heart, and head.
Thank you, Stanley. So what we have today is an antitrust lawsuit filed by 5 million merchants in the United States. So we see that the merchant pays the banks a fee. The bank, if it's a different bank that's from the retailer as the customer, will pay to another bank a share of this fee, and a very small portion goes to Visa. So this lawsuit against 13 big banks in the United States, Visa and MasterCard, is not targeted only at us, Visa, because we only share maybe 0.05 or 0.1% of the transaction value of the interchange fee, 1 to 2%. So what we need to do is to communicate to them and explain to them that this is a very small portion and Visa is not responsible for a great bulk of it. At the same time, we negotiate with the 5 million merchants and on a class action basis to voluntarily reduce our share of this component. Then this would solve the class action lawsuit in the short term. In the effects that this will have in overall, the value and volume of transactions matters. So combine the value and volume together will give you the overall value of transactions. So what we see is that the service revenue, the key component currently at 38% of our revenues in the USA is affected, but only in the USA. Because in other countries, it only falls from 0.3% to 1.5%, and it's not an issue there. Next, we have the banks, the key merchants, retailers, and shoppers. 2 different banks for the same Visa network as central payment provider to merchants. The banks on the retailer side and the shopper side, if they are the same, pose no issue. But if they are different, we provide the service of data processing. Data processing revenue is something that we want to increase because the volume of transactions globally are increasing with customers buying more things online and traveling more around the world. So we see that there are 4 types of cards in Visa. Credit, which is the mainstay and growing, and although it's a very small portion in China, we see that the credit portion has a greater value of transactions as opposed to volume of transactions. In terms of debits, we have the Visa, the Electron, Intercredit, as well as Plus. Debit card transactions are growing in emerging markets such as Africa, South America, and the Middle East. And prepaid cards are typically used for corporate reasons, and some of them are used for transactional purposes in transport as well as utilities. We also have the ATM Plus network for customers to withdraw cash, and then this would have a duality of purpose and usually tied to a credit or debit card in the Visa network. So these opportunities provided to customers help add to value to the banks, and we have the Visa and Visa Signature, a more platinum level of card issuance. We need to encourage people to increase the card issuance for the banks so that we can retain our market share and become the leader in the first position in card circulation globally. The next thing we need to do is to talk about bank merchant acceptance, because in countries where Union Pay is less currently, especially in 2nd and 3rd tier cities, Visa is more renowned, and we need to tap into the areas of Africa, Middle East, and South America currently today before Union Pay gains a foothold there, where RMB transactions are less today. We also have the Visa International Association, where the financial institutions are our institutional clients, and we rely on them as a transaction processing to increase our data processing value, as well as offer them a differentiation compared to Union Pay, where we have value-added services in terms of analytics, data mining, giving them information that they do not know how to understand, and bring that in. We also encourage them to offer better technology by increasing our speed, as well as security of our network, which I will cover more later, as well as improve the efficiency of the processing of transactions. This will lead to increase in not only the banks, but also the merchants. So in terms of merchants, we have a need to increase the acceptance by streamlining point of sales terminals Currently, if you're a major retailer, you may own up to 10 or 20 different terminals, one for each card, one for each bank. What we want to do is negotiate with the banks to encourage them to combine in the various localities, to encourage them to have one point of sales terminal for more Visa banks, rather than just one for each bank. For example, one for Hong Kong, Shanghai, one for Bank of China, and one for Standard Chartered. We want them to combine these, and a lot of this depends on our negotiation with banks. On the security-wise, we have also recently introduced the EMV, as well as continuing our networks in terms of the CCV1, 2, PIN and signature, and more recently, two-factor authentication in the more developed countries. This security enhancement will encourage merchants to accept us, in particular the online merchants, where payments volumes are increasing. Card numbers that start with 4 are an easy way to differentiate us from China UnionPay, which starts with 62. And the merchants will then be able to recognize us as the provider of this electronic payment system. Therefore, we can offer promotions in tie-up with the merchants based on this 4 number instead of the 62, and then differentiate this in order to encourage customers to accept our card more, providing us with greater network effects, but at the same time a decrease in service revenue, which will be offset by an increase in data processing transaction revenue. Eventually, we intend to encourage merchants to go with Visa through special labels, seasonal promotions, add banners on the website, and this will lead on from our hands, partnership with people, to the heart and the heads of consumers.
By reaching out to the hand, we can then appeal to the head and heart of consumers. So firstly, let's look at where we are today. Well, Visa is number 1 in terms of transaction value and number 2 in card ownership, with CUP maintaining number 1. So to maintain leadership in terms of value in the long term, what we need to do is to increase share of mind and to increase share of wallet. So what we can do to achieve that, to reach out to the head and heart of consumers, is to increase availability, assurance, and affordability. With emotional appeal and rational persuasion, looking at the widest network and convenience, which is our point of difference against what our competitors have, and also to be transparent and safe in terms of technology and data processing, as Kenneth has mentioned. And then lastly, we need to look at transaction fees to be competitive in the market and to have rational appeal to our consumers. So playing up our points of difference in terms of availability and assurance, and to erode the CUP's competitive edge in terms of cost. So introducing to you, Go with Visa and Pay with Visa. So looking at Go with Visa, what we have now is a share of mind and the highest transaction value. But what we can do to enhance that is to have a global integrated combinations campaign to reinforce our leadership position and to ensure that we always have the top in share of mind. So to play up the factors that we have, our points of difference, is in terms of network in not only the first tier but second and third tier cities in all currencies, and also the fact that we're very stable and very transparent, and also rationally to increase what we have in terms of merchant network, to increase the benefits to our consumers and businesses in terms of discounts and incentives in monetary terms. So therefore, Go with Visa, leveraging on our extensive coverage to appeal to our consumers worldwide, reaching out to the head and heart of consumers. Secondly, now that we've looked at how we can increase the share of mind, we look at how we can increase share of wallet. So Go with Visa and Pay with Visa, reducing the attrition to CUP even when we have co-branded to them. We look at how CUP is superior to us in terms of RMB dominated transactions. However, we do see that we have an advantage in non-RMB transactions. And what we can do to appeal on that is to change our conversion system from double currency to something that's single currency, to play up the advantages we have for the big 7 currencies that are non-RMB dominated. Also, now that we have looked at how we can have more competitive rates, since they are currently set arbitrarily by Visa, is to look at how we can reduce the settlement fees in terms of 1 to 2% versus CUP, which has 0, and to look at that in a phased approach to 0.5 to 1.5% to increase not only the value and frequency but also the volume of transactions, as CUP has the highest number of cards worldwide now. So Go with Visa and Pay with Visa to leverage on our competitive edge in terms of non-RMB dominated transactions, and also the advantages that we have in terms of our networks in merchants and banks worldwide. So to appeal to our consumers and leveraging on our competitive edge, we look at how we can increase our share of mind and share of wallet.
Thank you, Chi Min. Now, how does all this translate into financial terms? Firstly, we see that we'll forecast growth in the service revenue by about 12% CAGR. Now, this is in line with the CAGR that Visa has been experiencing over the past 5 years. Now, this is even in the case where we have reduced our merchant fees because we believe that we will draw in greater volumes and therefore continue to grow our service revenue. But observe that we have decided to grow forecast a growth in data processing revenue by about 20%, and this is much higher than the 15% that has been experienced by Visa over the past few years. And this is again as a result of our stronger marketing campaign to draw in more customers to use Visa cards, and therefore we have more transactions and therefore more data processing revenue. International transactions would also grow at about 18%, slightly higher than what has been experienced over the past few years, because we believe that increasing internationalization and globalization will see greater travelers and therefore greater usage, greater growth in revenue in this aspect. For other revenue, we will forecast inline growth as the past 5 years. This is 4.8%. What all this translate is by 2016, 5 years from now, we will have a different revenue breakdown. Data processing will increase from 31% currently to about 38%, where service revenue would decrease from the current 38% to about 31%. International transaction revenue would stay approximately same as current revenue breakdown of 25%, while other revenue will also stay constant at about 5%. So we now see that from our financials that our strategy is changing the business model and the fee structure of Visa, and yet Visa will still observe a strong incremental growth even after our strategy. But of course, we have to look at the incremental cash flow. Comparing our incremental growth rate, consolidating all the incremental revenue, and therefore using operating margin of 60%, which is what Visa currently experiences. We also factor in extra expenses. These include marketing expenses and technological improvement expenses. We believe this will be about 10% of incremental revenue, whereas from this 6% will go to marketing and 4% will go to increasing our technology. Now we will see that after all this, we will still observe a strong positive operating cash flow over the next 5 years. Now what this translates into MPV is, using a WACC of 10%, we will see strong MPV of about $3.6 billion in the base case. This is about 1/3 of the revenue that was most recently earned by Visa. Therefore, our strategy change is very lucrative for Visa. Even in a conservative case where we observe a lower growth rate and also a higher WACC, we will still observe a positive MPV. Now, this is our implementation timeline. We believe that the marketing campaign and communications campaign is very important. It will take place the next 2 years. These 4 sections are changing our fee structure, and it will take place over the next 5 years, reducing our fees. And this item is improving our technology. We will review our technology and improve them every half a year over the next 5 years. Some of the risks that we have to consider is that, firstly, our business is very dependent on the WTO dispute resolution. Whether we can enter into China successfully depends on this outcome. What if this fails? Well, we will look at other markets which are growing exponentially, such as Latin America, experiencing about a 20% growth rate. We will also look to issue cards from SARs, which have some autonomy from the Chinese government. Second possible risk is that there may be increased antitrust lawsuits where other countries follow the US antitrust lawsuit. Now, what we have to do is to increase our marketing and communications efforts to these countries, because we have reduced our fees and we have made ourselves a more customer-friendly card provider. We have to communicate this to people from these other countries to reduce the frequency of lawsuits. And thirdly, our recommendations depend heavily on technology. What if our technology breaks down? What we have to do is to maintain backup technology, backup hardware. We can run a hot and cold standby, whereas we have one software operation, but we have two or more hardwares, so that if one of the hardware fails, we can still continue to run our technology.
Okay, so reaching out to the through the hands, appealing to the heart, to the head, and touching the hearts of consumers. What we've brought to you today is the Go with Visa, Pay with Visa strategy, where we look at how we must maintain relationships in the long term, worldwide and in China, to maintain our market leadership in the long term amidst intensifying competition. So thank you, and we welcome all your questions.
The Citigroup issues of the credit card denominated in renminbi earlier this year, how that actually affect your strategy? Because one of the biggest banks in the world, they successfully do that in China by using local currency. But your strategy is to focus on the non-renminbi business.
Yes.
So I mean, having that piece of information, okay, Citigroup issue of renminbi cards in China.
Yeah.
Will that affect your your overall proposal already taken into account of that Citigroup development? Just want to hear from you how you taking that into consideration to come up with your documentations.
Yeah, definitely we have
We consider this situation, but we believe that the thing that's preventing Visa from really exploring the China market, it is the WTO the WTO dispute. Whereas China really wants CUP to have a dominant position in China market. Now the Visa is a very strong competitor in this same market, where Citigroup is a credit card issuer, where they do not have the payment network that Visa has. So it is more difficult for Visa to try to explore something within the Chinese market, within Chinese boundaries. Therefore, we looked beyond Chinese boundary to see how we can defend our market outside of Chinese boundary. And our strategy is more geared towards this aspect.
Also, building on to what Itra has said, what's important to the Visa market is non-RMB dominated transactions, because the WTO restrictions are mainly to companies like Visa, to EPS companies instead of banks. And also, Citigroup is a partner and a competitor. So to maintain that relationship, the delicate balance between competitor and partner, while growing to our strengths, which is in non-RMB dominated currency, since the Bank of China is growing CUP in China and worldwide. Therefore, to play to our strengths and to maintain relationships with Citigroup as a partner and a competitor would be to maintain our strengths in non-RMB dominated transactions, as we've mentioned with our head, heart and hand strategy.
It looks like to me that you're going to pursue a hand-in-hand relationship with the cards in China, right? In that case, are you going to drop out your WTO filing?
The WTO filing is a joint filing by the government of the United States, which is not filed only by Visa, but also Master and Amex. It was initiated by Visa, but this is in order to enter the market 5 years, 10 years from now, after the 5-year expected timeline for the WTO process to go through. But China UnionPay maintains a very nice relationship with us that we need to cultivate, and therefore we'll retain our co-branding. We still have the number 4 issued co-branded China UnionPay and Visa cards that customers use overseas. When an overseas transaction, the benefits that the customer has is that instead of a 0% transaction fee that they pay for the currency overseas to China to UnionPay, we are reducing our fee to 0.5%. But although this fee is higher, our widespread acceptance in the 2nd and 3rd tier cities that China travel to, as well as our marketing and promotional efforts directly to customers and our tie-up with the merchants, will encourage the customers to still use our card over the UnionPay payment system.
Yes, and to increase the preference for consumers for our Visa versus CUP, we also look that in the long term, a successful WTO filing would definitely be to our advantage. However, we must not just bang on for that to happen, but to work within our boundaries to appeal to the consumers with what we have at the moment, and to enhance that should the WTO filing be successful. And therefore, we've looked at how we could play to our strengths with the head, heart, and hand strategy while hoping and pushing forward for the WTO filing.
A couple of questions. Firstly, relating to the financials, the forecast for the next 5 years. Is there any consideration or input into potential fines from the antitrust lawsuits? There's been some significant fines in the past. Has that been worked into the financials?
We increased we believe that from our strategy of reducing fees and also increasing communications, marketing expenditures, we have focused a huge amount of money into these aspects. We believe that this will really reduce the probability of the antitrust case pulling off. We believe that we can settle for much more amicable out-of-court settlement, and therefore will not have to incur a huge antitrust lawsuit fees because of our change in business model, change in fee structure, and because of our communication that we have and communication expenses that we have made to communicate this new fee structure to everyone else.
I can see where that would have a favourable impact, but however the lawsuits are about past practice, not future, so there could be still a high chance of significant fines.
There could still be a high chance, but what our strategy really looks at is I did not forecast this into the financials because we believe this is not incremental. This will still happen regardless of our strategy. What our strategy really do would reduce the chance of this happening. So I should in fact forecast increase in a sort of an inflow of cash from the reduce in fines that could happen because of our strategy. But I took a conservative approach and did not forecast this. So our strategy would reduce the probability, but I did not forecast this because it is not an incremental cash flow.
And then just in terms of the timeline, you spoke about some long-term plans, some immediate hits and some long-term plans. I'm curious to know how much assessment you made of likely competitor moves over those years. There is obviously a lot of emphasis on CUP and MasterCard. Do you think about other upcoming competitors in markets such as Africa and so on?
I think for us, we see that our biggest strength right now, because of the business model, is relying on our network effect. And the fact that we are actually the market leader in terms of total transaction volume, and I think the top 3 in terms of total cards issued, total cards issued. So we're actually going to leverage upon that and actually do our peer analysis. And we'll actually be competitive, we see that MasterCard, CUP is our closest competitor. And whereas for other competitors to actually be able to match up to that or actually put in some actions that can have some significant impact on us, it's going to be going to take them a lot of effort. That's the reason why we decided to focus on these competitors. Yeah.
Looking at the history, we recognize that in the Euro, for example, they started Euro INSV, which is the Euro system for payments, but that did not take off because it was very limited to Europe. So something that's similar that comes up in Brazil, Latin America, South Africa will have a similar fate, because eventually we will negotiate with the banks there, the local banks, for example, Standard Bank in Africa, BBVA and Intel Unibanco in Brazil, to have the usage of Visa rather than other cards. And we see that Amex, as a competitor with 11% market share, has a higher fee than us for overseas transactions of 2.5 to 3% compared to our reduced fee of 0.5 to 1.5. And even currently, MasterCard is at 1 to 2. Even if Master reduces the fees, we recognize that Visa and Master are actually owned by similar banks, because the structure of Visa and Master are owned by major global banks in the United States as well as in the world. So any competitive relationship with Master and Visa is more complementary rather than competitive.
Okay, your go with Visa, pay with Visa strategy for the Chinese market are loud and clear. I have an idea to you. Okay, so you need to consider.
Okay.
How about giving a Chinese name to Visa? Okay, you think, oh, it's a brilliant idea. Okay, what the Chinese name you're going to give on Visa, and explain why you give that Chinese name. So 2 questions. Is that a good idea? If yes, then what is Chinese name and why you pick the Chinese name?
Right, okay. So firstly, whether it's a good idea, and secondly, if we give a Chinese name, what name would it be? Okay, so to answer the first question, I believe Visa is actually a very well recognized name, even in China. I was in Shanghai previously, and Visa is actually still used in China still, and people do not have problem with pronouncing the name Visa. And also Visa is the recognized name, and to maintain our global brand consistency across the markets, especially as we look at how Chinese consumers will be using Visa worldwide, especially because they will be traveling overseas and using Visa more overseas, and therefore the name Visa as an English name, to maintain that and to maintain a consistency and preference across the world would be preferred versus giving a Chinese name. But if we were to give a Chinese name, I would suggest that since Union Pay is called Yinglian, which is kind of silver union in China, I would suggest that we call ourselves Jinglian Gold, because gold is better than silver and Visa is the global market leader. So yeah, that would be our answer to that question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.